Everybody. I'm very happy to welcome you at this very important webinar on the promotion of women's financial inclusion in Pakistan, which is a very important topic. And thank you very much for everybody joining, for our panelists and everybody who will intervene during this discussion. I would like to thank, obviously, the panelists, Karen Groen, Marie-Hélène Eskenderian, and Parwati Sarjodaja. We will really bring to us very important knowledge and perspective on this very important topic. And obviously, thank very warmly Governor Reza Bakir and Deputy Governor Sima Kamir. We will walk us through this whole 1 hour discussion and see how we can continue to promote and support Pakistan in this very important endeavor. This is obviously a very important topic for all of us. This inclusive growth is part of the 5 Gs in our new country partnership framework. So that includes obviously women financial inclusion, and our support to financial inclusion and gender equality and inclusion is an important component of this strategy. So this is part of a broader engagement and discussion by the World Bank in Pakistan. So to start with, let me invite Hartwig Scheffer, who is the World Bank's Vice President for South Asia, to give opening remarks, and then we will go through the whole agenda. And let's get started, and apologies for the couple of minutes lost at the beginning. Hartwig, your turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody who is connected. It's a great pleasure and a privilege to open this very important webinar. And I want to thank the Governor of the State Bank of Pakistan and the Deputy Governor for their leadership in bringing this webinar together. This is fantastic. It's timely. It is absolutely necessary. Also, let me thank the fellow colleagues and friends who are panelists, Karen Crown, who we have worked together very well. I know you are passionate about that, Marie-Hélène Eskenderian and Parvati Sarjodaja. So thank you for making time and joining us, because this webinar is really building on the shared commitment and to identify actions that promote financial inclusion of women in Pakistan. And when I visited Pakistan, I've always been amazed about the energy, the initiative, the innovation that is coming from women. But then it is puzzling that only 16% of women, that is 1 out of 6 women in Pakistan, have currently access to a bank account. And that is in stark contrast to when we look at men, where it is really 3 times more likely that a man has a bank account compared to a woman. And I think this is one thing that we all agree needs to change, because that gender gap is the 2nd largest in South Asia. And by comparison to other countries, there's a lot of scope to increase the financial inclusion of women in Pakistan. So policy reform, the policy forum that we have is a unique opportunity to move this forward, because closing the gender gap has to be across the entire board. And that's why this is part of our upcoming country partnership framework. It is obvious in many parts of the society and the economy of Pakistan, because half of the adolescent girls are out of school. Only 1 in 4 women are part of the labor force, and so on. So we need to look at this in a holistic way. And the financial sector has already demonstrated its leadership with the digital financial inclusion. This is something that will actually help. And the last time I visited Pakistan, the State Bank of Pakistan was launching the digital payment system. And I know that there has been tremendous progress between 2019 and 2020. There's faster licensing for fintech companies. There is the Russian digital remittance account that was in September last year. Cost-effective and interoperable, safer retail payments. All this is very important in order to close the gender gap. But we also need to make sure that there is access to connectivity, to mobile phones, to digital skills, because otherwise the gender gap will widen again. So we need to look at that as well. One area I think where the financial sector can take a lead is with regard to employment of women. And with regard for the government, with regard to procurement from women-led businesses. This is absolutely critical. And we in the bank actually have adopted a policy, or we are monitoring this very closely. Right now, female employment in the financial sector is 13%, roughly the same as financial inclusion. But the State Bank of Pakistan has 1 out of 4 employees being a woman. So you're setting a signal, and I think we need to get other financial institutions to follow suit and do the same thing. Procurement from women-led businesses is very limited across the government sector. And I think, that, again, sending the signal and monitoring how we are doing is absolutely important. The target that we are setting ourselves by 2023, that 1 out of 4 women or 20 million women in Pakistan have access to a bank account, is ambitious. But I think we can even be more ambitious. And I'm challenging this meeting, this group, this panel here, whether we can take this up to 30% or even 35%. Because I think we don't have the luxury of wasting any time on this. And if we all pull our comparative advantages together, I think we can reach a target of 35. And this is the challenge for this panel. I look forward to an interesting discussion. I'm passionate about this because when I grew up, it was normal that my grandmother, who was born in 1903, had a bank account. Not only one, she had a savings account, one with the post office, one with a local bank. My mother had a bank account. So why can't every woman in Pakistan have access to a bank account, get independent, like my grandmother and my mother? So with that, thank you very much. I look forward to this discussion. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you very much, Art, and thank you very much for your passion and challenging the panel. So I think this brings lots of important information and ideas to our panelists, and that are going to discuss how to implement the banking on equality policy, which turns now to the question, what is that banking on equality policy? So I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Seema Kamil, who is the Deputy Governor of the State Bank of Pakistan. She's a champion of women's financial inclusion. She was in the private sector. She's now at the State Bank of Pakistan, and she's leading the implementation of that policy. So I'm going to give her the floor so that she sets the scene somehow. What is the policy before we then turn to the panel on how to promote it? So Deputy Governor, the floor is yours.
Thank
John,
you so much.
Interject 1 minute. I think there is an open mic in the system from Dilshad Ali Ahmed. That mic can please be closed. We will be able to listen to Deputy Governor Seema Kamil's presentation. It's from Dilshad Ali Ahmed.
Thank you, Governor. Dilshad, if you could mute yourself before we turn to Seema. Thank you. Seema.
Right, thank you. Thank you so much, John, and thank you to everyone who's here. This is something, on a personal level, this is very, very important to me, and I'm so glad that I can be part of this. Because I've been 35 years in banking, and for female financial inclusion, you know, the needle has not moved particularly. We've tried many things, and so we're very much hopeful that this policy, which will actually may on the face of it look more prescriptive, I think is very much needed. I think Hart gave in some numbers, but I'll just put some context in that. The gender gap is not closing. Everyone we talk to says, oh yes, it must happen, but then it doesn't happen. So a lot of it, so I think we've taken it upon ourselves that we want at least 20 million women to be financially included by the year 2023. Now, if you look at the numbers, on the face of it, it looks like 18 million are. But then if you look at active account holders, there are only 11 million women. And that active is actually defined as one transaction in a year. So that's not truly financially included. So I just wanted to set that scene to why we need now a much more targeted policy to be able to really move the needle. And that's why we are going in for this. And that's why we're consulting. We've already consulted with a lot of the domestic stakeholders in this. And now we are having this session. So that was just to set some context. So we are seeing that a gender neutral view is not working. And we need to have gender intentional policies. And that is why we are working on what we are working on now, and we hope to launch it very quickly, we hope. So just moving to what this policy then is, we have 5 pillars. And the very first one is to make sure that the financial institutions actually have more women working for them, because that's the only way that they will actually stop being gender neutral and have women as part of the workforce. So the first pillar is gender diversity in financial institutions. And one of the targets we're giving, which is a specific target, is that by 2023, 20% of their workforce should be women. Just for your information, the range is between 3% to 30%, but the average is around 13%. So that's the target. And we don't want it just within we also want this in branchless banking, which is actually a much bigger challenge. So that's the first pillar. The second is this gender lens on products and services, and have women-centric products. So what we are asking is that this is done very consciously. And so each financial institution would have a specialized banking department for women, and they will look at existing products and services and new products and services to see if the needs of women are actually catered for. And also then once they've set this up, and very specifically, this is after 6 months of issuance of this policy, they will have this unit. And then they will, within 6 months, start to develop and offer women-centric products and services. So that's the second pillar, which is the gender lens on everything that they do. The third pillar is women's champions at all customer touch points, which means not just branches, because we've already seen with COVID and all, it's also digital banking, branchless banking, call centers, whatever points at which a financial institution meets its customers, they should be women's champions. They don't have to be women, preferably women, but also men who will actually be trained to understand how to work with a women customer. Because one of the simplest things that we have seen is that they're not taken seriously. So to understand their needs is one step further to actually accept them as a customer that is a viable proposition for the bank is very important. So that's our third pillar, and that goes into place that 15% will have these women champions within one year, and within the 3-year period, 75% of touch points would have women champions. The fourth, and what's somehow been neglected, is robust gender disaggregated data and target setting, which is tied into that. So we would be collecting data on a quarterly basis from all the financial institutions that we regulate, and bring that data so that we can inform policy, as well as understand whether what we are doing is actually having the impact that we need to, and then understand where the need is. We were just talking a little while ago, how many women have come in digitally, and I don't have an answer to give you, and we can't work like that. So that, I think, will also then help us to rate banks as to whether they're women-friendly or less women-friendly than they ought to be. And the last is to have a policy forum on gender, which would take in not just the financial institutions, but the larger elements of society, both the regulators other than the central bank, banks, women's groups, NGOs, bring them in to tell us how we're doing and to learn from them what we should be doing next. And then if we need to make some correction as we move along, also to do that. So that's really the summary of the policy. And I've tried to be as brief as possible. So I hope that that has covered most of the points. And we're always available to talk about it further. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Seema, for this really informative and great overview of the policy, which really sets the scene for the panel discussion. So I'm now going to turn to Dr. Reza Bakir, the governor of the Central Bank of Pakistan. He's really been leading the way for an innovative and inclusive financial sector in Pakistan. And I think also today's event is very important because he's reaching out and trying to get perspective and guidance and lessons learned from other countries. So that's why he's going to moderate this panel and also ensure that it brings new lights to how Pakistan can continue on this endeavor. So Reza, I'm going to turn over to you to introduce the panelists, chair the discussion, and then we will have a quick summary at the end. Thank you very much, and we look forward to the very different perspective of our panelists and yours, obviously. Reza, the floor is yours. You are muted, Governor.
Thank you, Jean. Let me begin by thanking the World Bank for organizing this event and really partnering with us to help us achieve our goal of reducing the gender gap in women's financial inclusion. I'm very grateful to Naji, the World Bank country director, who could not be with us today for personal reasons. And this event today started with a conversation with him. I'm very grateful to Hart as well as to Alfonso, both vice presidents, for being here with us today. And it signals, in my view, the commitment on the part of the World Bank to support goals like this. And I thank you. I also want to thank all the participants who are tuned in today. This event is being streamed live on the State Bank's Facebook page. And we have many people, both domestically as well as internationally, who are joining us today. The State Bank of Pakistan, as a central bank, and like any central bank, has as its key goals the goals of maintaining price stability, the goal of maintaining financial stability, and the goal of supporting growth. But we have learned as central bankers, and I learned over my previous career in the IMF, that there are important market failures that take place in countries, in the financial world. And one of those failures is especially financial inclusion. And within that, a particularly pronounced failure that occurs to various degrees across countries is the gender gap in financial inclusion. And over the years, central banks have grown to realize that they must act within their regulatory ambit to try to address such failures. And I'm very happy to see that this awareness has also grown in many financial institutions, international financial institutions, including the IMF, where I used to work, the World Bank, where I have worked before as well. And I really feel that at this time, for the State Bank of Pakistan to be launching this strategy on banking on equality, that we have the right international context to do so. The challenges ahead of us are great, as our Deputy Governor Seema Kamil has laid out. As a country, we need to do a lot more to bring in women in the financial sector. Our Deputy Governor Seema Kamil gave you one example of accounts. It is the example of the measure used most often. But even that is not sufficient. As I think Hart said, we need to demonstrate that women-led businesses, for instance, are also given some priority as far as procurement is concerned. And we need to demonstrate, by example as well, to bring in women in key positions in the public sector. At the State Bank, we are delighted that a woman leader in Pakistan, like our Deputy Governor Seema Kamil, decided to join the State Bank earlier last year and is helping us lead this effort on reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion. Our journey on this began more than a year ago when in the State Bank, we realized that business as usual in reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion in Pakistan was not working. Therefore, we thought that we need to come up with a more proactive strategy, and using our powers as a regulator, we need to work with our regulated institutions, primarily banks, to demonstrate that we can chip away and make progress on this goal of reducing the gender gap in inclusion. Hence the pillars which Deputy Governor laid out in front of you, the pillars including on employment, the pillars including on women-centric products, the pillar including on gender disaggregated data, and others. We formally launched this strategy in December, just a couple of months ago. And after that, we have had a series of consultations with domestic stakeholders and leaders. These include people in parliament, people in the government, people in the financial sector, many women leaders, and roughly as many men. After concluding those domestic consultations, today is a very important event for us to get input from a tremendously accomplished panel of international experts. And therefore, I'm extremely excited today to be introducing such a awe-inspiring panel of women leaders who have demonstrated how we can, at a global level, make progress on reducing the gender gap in financial inclusion. I'm going to introduce the panel to you, and then I'm going to get into a conversation with the panel members. And I'm going to try to get this as interactive as possible while also trying to give each of the panelists the space to be able to make the points that they wish to make. First and foremost, we have with us Dr. Karen Brown from the World Bank, who is the Global Director of the Gender Group. Dr. Brown is an internationally recognized expert on gender issues and development and has been at the World Bank since 2014. She has led the institution's development and implementation of a gender strategy that deliberately and strategically targets gaps in endowments, jobs, assets, and increasing women's leadership and voice. Dr. Groen has authored and edited several books on gender equality. She was also an associate editor of Feminist Economics from 2007 to 14, and a founding member of the International Working Group on Gender and Macroeconomics. It's really a great pleasure to have you here, Karen. And as a former PhD student of economics, back when I was doing my PhD, things like gender and macroeconomics were often not mentioned in the same sentence. So we really have come a long way, and I'm excited of this journey that has been taken so far and is ahead of us. Our second panelist, equally exciting for me, is Ms. Mary Ellen Eskenderian, who's the President and CEO of Women's World Banking, which is a global nonprofit organization devoted for giving low-income women in the developing world access to financial tools and resources to achieve security and prosperity. I'm particularly excited that Mary Ellen is with us today because her organization has actually worked on a project in Pakistan, and I'm hoping that we'll get into that when we do the panel discussion. Ms. Ellen joined World Banking in 2006 and leads the Women's World Banking Global Team in New York. She is also a passionate advocate for women's economic empowerment through greater access to finance, and is a leading voice for leadership in financial services. Hats off to you, Mary Ellen, for all that you have come to represent as well. Our third panelist, and extremely excitingly, because with us a leader who is actually on the ground demonstrating by the products that her bank is launching, is Ms. Parvati Suryadaya. I hope I got the pronunciation correct, who is the President and CEO of Ocbc Nisb Indonesia Bank. Ms. Parvati was appointed the President Director and CEO of Bank Ocbc in December 2008. She joined the bank as a director in 1990 and appointed a President and CEO in 2008 and re-elected in 2011, 2014, and 2017 in her current position. She is currently a board member of Perbanas and of Indonesian Bankers Association. One bit by way of ground rules as I go through a few questions on my end and then turn to some questions from the audience. is that once I turn to one panelist, ask a question, and we get an answer, if any of the other panelists would like to jump in because they have a specific comment to add to what was said, please indicate that you would like to take the floor by waving at me, and do so. To the extent possible, I would like to have a dialogue on this very important goal. I'm going to start with Ms. Parvati, and I'm going to start with you because you're in the trenches. And I'm going to start with you because your bank has recently launched a product specifically designed for women. And in our view, a very good illustration of what in our banking on equality strategy we call the second pillar, which is women-centric products and services. Now, your product is specifically designed for women entrepreneurs and women-owned small and medium enterprises. It seeks to provide not only banking solutions, but also non-banking services to women. And as background to all our listeners, I should mention that according to an estimate that I have seen, and I believe this is attributed to the National Statistics Agency in Indonesia, the MSME sector, micro and small and medium enterprises, accounts for about 60% of the gross national domestic product of Indonesia. And according to Bank Indonesia data, more than 60% of the millions of MSMEs in Indonesia are run by women as of 2018. So Ms. Parvati, tell us please, what is the business model behind the product that you have launched? And importantly, do you have some words of advice for the CEOs of Pakistani banks that are with us today? Some advice to them, because as part of our banking on equality strategy, they will be looking at designing women-centric products in Pakistan. So the floor is yours, Ms. Parvati.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Governor. Thank you so much again for the kind invitations. I will not be giving advice, but I'll be sharing what we are doing. If I'm allowed to give some backgrounds. So Bank Ocbc and Nisb is one of the top 10 banks in Indonesia. We would say that we are quite inclusive. We have about 56% of our employees are women. Among the senior line managements, 43% are women, and among the board of directors, 40% are women. And which is part of the solutionings. Actually, this also coupled with our journey on digitalizations, which we started a few years ago. As Indonesia is a very geographically widespread country of 270 million people, over 17,000 islands. And at the time, we feel that we cannot compete with banks with massive infrastructures, with thousands of branches and tens of thousands of ATM, while we only have few hundreds. So we built our digital banking capabilities for individuals as well as companies a few years before COVID hit, thinking that we would like to empower our customers so they can do their transactions anytime, anywhere, just like having a bank branch in their pockets. And then the other part is our relationship with IFC, which started more than 20 years ago. Thank you so much for all the trust. And actually, we are one of the first banks in Indonesia to have gender financings from IFC. And IFC came to us and opened our eyes with various data, actually. It's about 2 years ago, which really make a lot of sense from many aspects. We strongly believe in gender equality, which is actually beyond social, moral, or fairness issue. It is an economic and prosperity issue. With more gender equality, GDP will grow higher. Tackling the gender gap is actually to address economic challenge. That's why I'm very supportive of such event as tonight. For banks or businesses, research have shown also companies with gender diversities perform better. And specifically for banks, women SME constitute around, as Governor mentioned, 60% of Indonesian total SME. Study also have shown, which shared by IFC, this is per 2019, women borrowers has better risk, lower NPL. Roughly, if I'm not mistaken, 3% of NPL level for women entrepreneurs, while in total, it's about 4.9% of NPL. So you can work the math for the other sides. So in COVID situations, studies also have shown that women run business, respond and adapt better so the business can survive. So for us, the market is huge. Market potential is very clear and is a better risk. So for banks, it's a very strong economic case. Again, that's why I keep saying this is beyond fairness and social issues. So what we did is we combined our solutions after understanding deeper the challenges of women in doing business. Their main issue is actually women are expected to do different roles. First role, taking care of their home and family. Second role, taking care of their works and passions. Indonesia is still very much an Eastern country where society expects women to take care of the family and home first. Then and only then you can take care of your work. So on one side, women are the CFO of the family, managing day-to-day financing up to investments. And as an entrepreneur, they are expected also to run and manage the business. So we see that women requires a lot of support in many aspects. So having that insight, last November 2020, we introduced this so-called Women Warrior program. The aim is to support women SME and at the same time solving their pain points using the manage, grow, and life concept. The first one is manage. So we provide banking services that help women entrepreneurs to manage the business financials, personal financials, safely, conveniently, anytime and anywhere. Available at our mobile applications for individuals as well as for business. On top of that, we also provide the reportings, tax statement. In short, that we are trying to make it simple and convenient for the women to run their business, to manage their business. The second concept is to grow. So this to us is financial as well as beyond banking solutions. The objective here is to enable women entrepreneurs to grow their personal wealth and business. This is on top of our special loan package program as well as wealth solutionings. So we also provide business tools for women to be able to upscale their business by collaborating with various business solution providers. For instance, to help women's business to manage their accounting, their tax, their e-commerce, if they want to do social media marketing and other services. Again, the objective here is to help women to run their business effectively. And the last leg is LIVE, which is to assist capacity building for women-led business. We want them to grow. So education and support system is being done through our regular women talks, networking programs, as well as other non-financial benefits that women can take advantage on. So hopefully with this Women Warrior program, we can effectively support women entrepreneurs more. And again, thank you to IFC for supporting and enlightening us on this run.
Thank you, Ms. Parvati. I really like the name of the program, Women Warrior Program, and I do feel sometimes that the amount of energy that we have to put in it to push this is a little bit of a war. And at the State Bank, this is one of those wars that we are very, very delighted to be taking forward. It's more as much as a partnership that I hope will come about with banks. And I'm particularly happy to have you on this call because if we get feedback from any of our banks that is difficult to come up with products centered towards women, we will send them your way and we will tell them that we already have examples of some other banks in other countries offering such products. I will just wait for a minute to see if anybody would like to add anything from a broader cross-country perspective, if any of the other panelists have come across other products, examples of products in other countries that are women-centric products. Would you like to jump in, maybe, Mary Ellen? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Governor. That was just fascinating. I was just so impressed by the product that you described, Parvati, mainly, frankly, because it fits so nicely within at least everything that Women's World Banking has learned about the way to reach women entrepreneurs, needing to be a combination of both the financial and non-financial services, as well as the personal and the business. The number of factors that need to sort of align line. I thought everything you described fits so well. We see so often the lack of formal financial statements being not only a difficulty in running the business, but actually a difficulty in getting capital. So making that whole reporting process easier, supporting your women customers is hugely important. It might sound like a small thing, but it can be a very big hurdle. I guess the only thing I might add, and I'd love to hear what your experience was, we had a very similar program with the largest bank in Kenya Commercial Bank, where we were working with them to expand their outreach to women entrepreneurs. They had similarly had networking and training. They had adapted their lending methodology to be more cash flow based, because collateral, the lack of collateral is a real issue for women everywhere in the world, and it certainly was in the case of Kenya. But one thing that was really a stumbling block, and until we addressed it, we were really not making progress within the bank, is that it was really seen as just one more thing coming down from headquarters, one more initiative that the branch manager had to add to his or her list of initiatives. And it was really only once we did, a little gender sensitivity training, which I'm not always a fan of, but, to explain really what the gender gap was to the people who were working on the front lines, but also why it was such a good business case, and all of the data that you up at headquarters had needed to be communicated throughout the bank. And then we saw dramatic differences in the branches where we conducted this kind of training and really explaining the business case. We saw, within a matter of months, more than 50% of the loans being made to women entrepreneurs. So I don't want to take your moderating role away from you, Mr. Governor, but I'd love to hear how OCBC spread that message throughout the bank and got buy-in across the organization.
Wonderful question. Please, Ms. Parvati, if you could speak to that, and then I'll move on to Karen.
Okay. Yes, thank you again, Mary Ellen. I think that's totally one of a good reminder for us to do even more as well. But again, when we socialized this program, we gave those background in mind, as in the potential is there. I think but people on the ground, on the branches, also can see the potentials. And on top of it, this NPL, better risk, as proven, that is a very big thing. I guess bankers, being bankers, will always try to ensure that they have the lowest NPL also. So with this, it's not so difficult, I guess, because in Indonesia, the financial inclusions of women are quite 70% also level. So it's not as difficult. But putting it all together, it's quite a challenge at the beginning, but afterwards, with all this digitalization, the proposition become much more exciting. But I think it's a good reminder to have this urging reasons here why we do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Parvati, for that. One of the messages I take away is the point you made very eloquently about economic and business case for banks to be more proactive about offering financial services to women. And that begs the question of data, because one needs data to be able to do the to build the economic case for financial institutions to themselves be more aggressive in pursuing this. And in the context of data, I want to turn to Dr. Karen Brown, because I know that the World Bank has been very vocal in advocating and supporting member countries in collecting robust gender disaggregated data through Findex and other initiatives. And I'm also happy to share with everybody listening into on this call that the fourth pillar of our Banking on Equality strategy also calls for robust collection of gender disaggregated data. Now, my question, Karen, to you is, while it is extremely important for us to be able to get the data, and we shall be as part of our strategy. It is also a real challenge to translate data into meaningful actions. Now, my question to you is based on your experience. Can you share with us and the audience listening onto this call some examples of where gender disaggregated data has been successfully used for financial institutions to innovate or to achieve meaningful policies and outcomes?
Thank you so much. I first want to compliment you for your strategy. I think it's really fantastic. And I know the World Bank will want to work with you as much as you want us to help you ensure it's successful. So kudos to you. Data is hugely important, and it's hugely important for the business case, for companies and for banks and non-bank financial institutions, and it's hugely important for governments. And let me say a few words about that. There's different types of data, and as you know, we have, particularly on financial inclusion, as you know, we have demand-side data like the Findex, which tells us how many people around the world, men and women, are unbanked or don't have access to financial services. And this is great data, but it doesn't always help us to figure out how we can target and solve the problem. And for that, we need actually supply-side data. And we're involved in 2 initiatives, and I would like to invite Pakistan to join both of these initiatives. The first is a partnership that we have with the Alliance for Financial Inclusion, with the several development banks, the World Bank Group. The idea is to help the financial sector, banks, fintechs, other financial institutions to collect data, sex disaggregated data, on the usage of their financial products and services. And this is definitely not an easy task. There has to be MIS systems in place. There has to be good definitions of what constitutes the user, whether it's a woman-owned firm or whether it's consumer credit. But there's a movement now around the world to try to work with financial institutions to collect this. And we're in the process through our Women Entrepreneurs Finance initiative to set up something called the We Finance Code, which would be a voluntary code where financial institutions, starting with the regulators, would agree to provide data on an annual basis of direct financing for women-led firms with targets to make measurable progress in this area. And we're learning about this type of process. We have examples from the UK, from where the UK Treasury is actually working with NatWest and a whole range of banks, from British Business Bank or UK Business Angels Association, to annually report to Her Majesty's Treasury the sex disaggregated information. And that is seen to help the regulatory environment as well as the banking environment. And so what difference really can it make? Well, we've heard from Parwati in Indonesia that there's a business case for companies. Every time we've gone into a company and we ask them to disaggregate their data and services, they're always surprised, but many financial institutions just don't know. Just to give one quick example from insurance, we worked with AXA. They had no idea how many women were their distributors. They had no idea of whether they were more successful in reaching women. And through this survey that we did with AXA, She for Shield, they suddenly realized they do need to offer women-centric services, and they do need to understand how women can be part of their employee value chain. And they started introducing a whole range of new products and increasing their bottom line. But data is important for governments too. And I want to mention that Chile is the only country around the world that has consistently collected supply-side sex disaggregated data. It's the Chilean regulator that's doing this. The regulator implemented as part of its mandate for gender equality banks to report to it on their products and services. And the data, they have used the data to work with their commercial banks, Banco Estado, and others to target products to bring more women into the system. And impact evaluations show that use of different types of financial products, whether they're deposit products or debit cards, or even helping in this current crisis, getting women into the social registry for the Social Protection Service has been really critical. And in Mexico, we've had similar success with data to work with both the public and the private. So I think data is just essential, and it is true there's issues we have to overcome, but once we can start to collect the data, it opens everybody's eyes.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. That was extremely helpful, and I think a very useful note for us to also look more closely at Chile. And between our Deputy Governor Saiba and myself, we will take a look at that and also what it takes to be part of the initiative you are doing with AFI. We generally have a very good collaboration with AFI, but since we are launching this strategy, it would be good for us to try to live up to the standards that you are trying to establish. So really appreciate those comments. I realize also we are a bit short on time. I want to transition to another question, and I want to come to Ms. Eskenderian on this question. We've been talking about data, and I want to move from hard concepts like data to soft concepts like social norms. And the question that I want to get to Ms. Eskenderian is, your organization takes the lead in so many different countries about ensuring that women get to play a bigger role in the financial sector. Now, it is generally acknowledged that social norms can be an impediment in advancing women's financial inclusion. And it is also generally believed that the presence of more women in financial institutions can encourage female customers to consider and use formal financial services. And hence, our Banking on Equality strategy sets a target for increasing the percentage of women staff in financial institutions, and specifically customer touchpoints. Now, your organization led a project and intervention in Pakistan, and I want to ask you if you can share some of the results and challenges you encountered from that experience, and how we can benefit from your experience in Pakistan as well as perhaps in other countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Governor, and I add my congratulations to Karen's. This is such an exciting initiative, and women's financial inclusion is a big enough challenge that you need to take it on in the shape and scope that you have. So please do call on Women's World Banking to assist, because it's a wonderful effort that you and the Deputy Governor are spearheading. Maybe I can just take a little bit of a slight step back. I am conscious of the time as well, because I think the work that Women's World Banking did with the company that was previously known as MobiLink and then changed their name to Jazz, so a mobile network operator that had a mobile wallet product that they were offering through a microfinance bank, really touches on so many of the issues that you've raised in your different pillars. We were brought into the project when the bank realized that despite very intentional efforts to use this product as a financial inclusion mechanism, only 12% of the wallet holders were women. And so they were collecting gender disaggregated data, which was wonderful. But unfortunately, we do see very often, even when it's collected, it's not used as a mechanism for decision making. And so when we went in and literally did nothing more than look at the company's own data, we found that the new women's product that they thought they needed and that they had brought Women's World Banking in to help design really wasn't what they needed. They found that 12% of women were using the same services in the wallet at more or less the same volumes that men were, and they really had the same level of profitability on those products and services that they were achieving from their male clients. Where their real bottleneck was in onboarding. And the process they used and many mobile money providers use is a potential client goes into a small shop In the case of Jazz, their agents were at that time nearly 100% men. And so a woman in the Pakistani context walking into a shop that was owned by a man, she was alone in that shop with a man, was very uncomfortable to begin with. And then if she were to take that step to then have to give that man her cell phone number was just so contrary to so many of the social norms that neither she nor the male family members were really comfortable with that. So where we worked initially with Jazz was just about that whole onboarding process. And we found two main avenues that I think may be helpful as the central bank works with the rest of the sector. First of all, and we've seen this in so many countries, women are really responsive to referrals from other women. And when they hear that a woman is recommending a product to them, that really means something. So we dramatically changed the way they worked on referrals, the language that they used when one woman was going to refer another woman client. And then the really interesting thing that we discovered, both in terms of referral language and then broader marketing language, was that while the women clients really needed to see that this was a woman's product, that other women were using it, the men didn't particularly mind. They took up the product at exactly the same rate they had previously. So you saw the gendered, if you will, language very important to the women and not really an issue for the men. So, that was a very big learning for us. The second, and I think one of the most exciting pieces, which you alluded to, is this issue of agents. And we were very fortunate to partner with Unilever, which had already established a nationwide network of shopkeepers, of women-owned businesses, the Goody Bajis. And we trained the Goody Bajis. And when I say we, it was both a combination of the Unilever team that already had a lot of women trainers, as well as the Jazz Cash trainers in how to be Jazz Cash agents. They were already well-respected women in the community. We knew that these were shopkeepers that women and the men in those women's families were comfortable with the women interacting with. And they became a very popular outlet. We increased the onboarding of women clients during the first 8 months by 42%. It was really considered a win-win-win in the sense that the Jazz Cash was onboarding more women clients. The Goody Bajis had more business coming into their shops, not only more people coming in and buying their other products, but also now earning money as banking agents. So, if I could just one last plug for banking agents, we're finally now with the COVID crisis really starting to see some very interesting gender differences in female agents and male agents. And I don't care, I'm not going to speculate on this, but for whatever reason, both men and women in many countries we're working with seem to feel more comfortable dealing with female agents. There's an ability to ask questions that maybe a man might not want to ask another man, particularly when it has to do with technology. We've seen, we've been working for the last year with Bank of Baroda, the second largest public sector bank in India. There we've seen their increase in women banking correspondents. We see a much higher rate of conversion. If a woman agent signs a client on, much more likelihood that that client will then actually interact with the bank. We're seeing savings balances as high as 3 times more with the women agents as we are with the men. And women, again, for whatever reason, are able to cross-sell insurance products, credit products, in a way that we don't see the male agents doing quite as well, again, with both men and women. So I think the idea that you're trying to increase women in those touch points is a really business smart as well as a very inclusive strategy.
Thank you, Ms. Eskenderian. If I know that Alfonso has to give closing remarks, but Alfonso, if I can request your indulgence for a few more minutes, there's one question I really want to come to our Deputy Governor, Seema Kamil Sahiba, because it speaks to social norms. Before I come to that question, just want to say, Mary Ellen, what wonderful insights that you've shared with us about how women respond to referrals from women much more, and especially for the bank CEOs, the CEOs of Pakistani banks who are listening. I hope they're also seeing the business proposition here, that as far as cross-selling is concerned, as far as other income earning products are concerned, using these insights about how they can cross-sell better, if it is a woman referring to a woman, is giving them ideas for how they can help us achieve the goals of the strategy. But the question I want to turn to our Deputy Governor, Seema Kamil Sahiba, because you have spoken passionately in the context of social norms about the issue of respect, about how, what women really want, especially in our Eastern cultures, is the demonstration of respect when they go up and try to transact or do business. Speak to us a bit, Deputy Governor, from your own journey, having reached the very top banking sector of Pakistan, leading one of the largest private banks, and more generally about what you have learned about what financial institutions can do better to give that respect to women in our country.
So I'll, in the interest of time, I'll be very brief, and I'll talk about my experience with branches and with banking. One of the banks that I was with, which is the largest bank in the country, actually did work with IFC on a gender model, and we faced these issues of we also set a target for ourselves on how many women we should have, and I used to control I was responsible for the 2,000 branches that they had, and when I told them this, they said the bank will stop. It will not be able to function if you have 25% women. And then we started to show them the numbers about how many deposits the women had and how much more stickier those deposits were. And all this that Parvati has been talking about, the NPL. And then I did something a little crazy. I said, if you open a woman's account, you'll get double the number of points than if you open a man's account. And then that made a dramatic difference. And then we did gender sensitivity training as well. And it was really about respect, real respect, in the sense of not respect for the work of it, or you're opening a door for them, or you think of them as weaker, but respect in the sense of being serious, understanding that they are serious decision makers. Somebody like Unilever or retail companies understand that because they make the financial decisions. And I think getting that message through was very, very important. And so very important things is to teach people to respect women as able to take decisions and able to actually interact and actually be, I mean, if a man and a woman came in, they only talked to the man. They thought that she just came along just for the ride. So that was very important. And I think that's why respect. And in my own journey, I've also found that really the more conservative men are often more respectful in these social norms than the more so-called liberal ones. And I've learned that very, sometimes a bit bitterly as well, because they pretend to be very liberal, but they're not. But it's the more conservative men who have actually been more respectful. So I think that's what I would add to that. And it's very, very important that they feel respected when they go anywhere, and that they're valued and that they're welcomed. So that's really my point on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor Sahib. And it's a really interesting interplay between incentives and norms. Your illustration of how when you offer twice the points or opening a woman's account, immediately is an example of how incentives can help to change norms. But clearly it's not sufficient, because gender sensitivity training, and particularly the softer concept of the true meaning of respect, is going to be critically important if we are going to succeed in our banking on equality strategy. Alfonso, you tell me if I can take one question from the audience. If I can, it's a really interesting question, but I'm also very sensitive to whether you really need to go. So tell me if
I can. No. Please go ahead, Governor.
I think my question is maybe directed to Dr. Karen Brown, and if anybody else. And I think it speaks a little bit about the remit of a central bank trying to work in this area. And I started off my remarks about how there was a traditional view of central banking over my career at the IMF. I've seen things completely change. Then during COVID, we have seen central banking really being stretched in directions it was not stretched before. We see very well-respected economists telling central banks to talk about inequality, to talk about climate change, and so forth. But we have a question from Fauzia Vikar, who is a gender mainstreaming expert, about how have institutional monitoring mechanisms been used to further improve the policy and regulatory and social environment for women, and giving it a bit more flavor, what tools can central banks legitimately use? And by tools, I mean a combination of carrots and sticks to move towards, reducing this gender gap in inclusion, both in letter and in spirit. And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about, and maybe even talk to us as central bank regulators, as to how far we can go, what is legitimate for us to go into, and what we should be mindful of.
That's such a great question, but I can't resist for one moment just adding on to the previous conversation, because I think it's so critical. The one thing that we've also learned is that when you have women agents, and the issues of trust and respect are really important, but there's an additional business case. Some of our research has shown that women customers are also more loyal to the bank than are men. And we've learned this for insurance services as well. So this helps in terms of more loyal in terms of being repeat customers, but also because of, as others have mentioned, the nature of other products and services that banks and non-bank institutions offer. So it's a strong business case right there. I'm so glad you mentioned the issue of the regulatory environment. I think, we've been in this space for a long time, and there's many things that I think central banks can do more of. And we're seeing some initiatives now in 3 areas. So the first is transparency in terms of working with the financial system, as I had mentioned, to report data. And we think that's really critical. And we had worked with, I had mentioned the IMF, which did a survey which actually asked central banks to report to them. And we think many central banks, more than 40 governments, actually took the initiative to add questions in their regular surveys of banks. That's only a first step. We think this information can be actually used much better. And it can inform the regulatory environment in terms of things like collateral requirements, for instance, in terms of getting rid of or changing regulations and norms that would permit more women, for instance, to become part of the system. So one example, movable collateral registries, all of the regulatory issues around those things, because women, as you know, may not own the immovable property like the land or the house. They may not have their name on that title. So movable collateral registries and registries that make it easier for women, for instance, to borrow. Those kinds of requirements, I think, are really, really important. The other issue right now that's taking hold is where are women themselves in the employee and government structure of central banks themselves. And there's huge attempt to actually get more women into the central banking system and as part of these conversations. And some of what we're hearing is that the nature of the conversation, particularly on the regulatory environment, is actually starting to change when you think about this. So I don't know if you looked at your own data on where women are across the whole governance structure, as well as your staffing kind of structure. And that's something that we're looking at. There's some efforts underway that you might be interested in going further on.
Thank you. Thank you. That is extremely helpful. I have been extremely excited and have learned a lot about the issues that we are grappling with. And there are actually more questions from the audience as well, but I am very conscious of time as well. I will therefore, I think, pass on the floor to Alfonso, but before doing that, we'll again thank Hart, Naji, Alfonso, for the World Bank for organizing this, and really to the panelists. I think the insights that we have gotten, Dr. Karen Brown, from you about data and the examples of some leading central banks like Chile, I think we're going to look to that, and we may reach out to you separately about what more we should be doing on our data part. That's a good note for Deputy Governor Seema and myself. From Mary Ellen Eskenderian, your tips, your insights about how, for our bank CEOs listening on this call, using women linkages, using women touch points can really help them grow their own businesses and make money on many of the products that they are cross-selling is a great hook that I hope will be taken by them. And to Ms. Parvati, for demonstrating that these things can be done and you are doing them, and that there are examples out there for Pakistani banks to be catering to women-owned businesses and not only just banking products, but also the non-bank areas that you mentioned, such as helping them with taxation issues and so forth. I hope has also generated some ideas for our bankers as well. So a really big thanks to all the panelists, and let me then pass on the floor to Alfonso.
Thank you very much, Governor. Thank you, panelists. It has been really a pleasure to be part of this event. Actually, I was tempted to jump in and to ask questions, given the richness of the discussions. First of all, I really would like to thank you, Governor Reza, and Deputy Governor Seema Kamil, for your leadership and for bringing us together today in this seminar. No, I think that this topic, that is very close to my heart and my experience in my previous positions, and also now in IFC, as you have here today. This is something that is at the core of our business and at the core of our strategy. I would also like to acknowledge our panelists today, Karen, Mary Ellen, and Parwati, for their insightful comments. I learned a lot, and this is so amazing, the experiences and the issues that they raised today, and the good points that they made in order to continue deepening our knowledge of this topic, and how we can really make sure that we have the good experiences from many different regions sharing across all of us. I think that clearly the State Bank of Pakistan must be applauded for its efforts to develop a dedicated and focused policy that aims to address the wide gender disparity on financial inclusion in Pakistan, as the Deputy Governor briefed us before today in the webinar. As many of you are aware, this is a country where women make up 49% of the population, but the women's labor force participation stands at only 20%. And as Hart was mentioning, it follows then that many women also face exclusion from accessing financial services. So the webinar is very timely and very relevant. Just consider the global picture. Now, globally, demand for financing for women-owned SMEs in emerging markets is estimated to be around $1.5 trillion. 1.5 trillion. When you think about this figure, it's it's shocking, no? And that is a figure that showcases a significant latent demand for financial services for women and for clients, but also a figure that we economists can, if we translate this figure into the potential that it can have in growth, in inclusive growth, is really amazing. No? So it's something that we should really consider very, very carefully. Despite this, in Pakistan, the overall lending to SMEs by the banking sector, we know that is low at around 10%. So one can estimate that access for women-owned SMEs will be even lower, given the level of or the ratio of women with access to a formal bank account, as Hart mentioned before. IFC's current strategic priorities includes a dedicated focus to improving financial inclusion levels in Pakistan, which is reflected in our World Bank Group country partnership framework, helping women having access to finance with a combination of providing dedicated advisory and investment support for banks and financial institutions. You know that IFC has a strong global track record of providing such investment and advisory services to banks to build profitable business lines for women, and also to help banks and financial institutions to strengthen their corporate governance, that, as we mentioned today, is a key piece of achieving better financial inclusion for women. We have a global committed portfolio of close to $3 billion in gender-focused investments across 89 banks in 49 countries, and technical advisory projects to 52 entities in 33 countries. So I think that the experiences that IFC can bring from one country to the others and from one type of institution to the others are really rich. As an example, with VP Bank Vietnam, we are targeting women entrepreneurs with a loan that has a 25 committed, where 25% is committed to women out of the loan that we provide to this bank, and capacity building support focus on creating a non-financial services proposition for women entrepreneurs that, as we discussed today, is very relevant. I don't know if as relevant, but definitely equally relevant than the financial services that we have and that we can provide. IFC also made a $150 million commitment in base, $220 million women entrepreneurs bonds. This is the first private sector gender bond issuance in the Asia Pacific, and we feel really proud of having been able to participate in this issuance. In Bangladesh, IFC's advisory support is also quite relevant to most of the main banks in the country, aimed at increasing access to finance to women's SMEs and build products and services for them. And as Parwati Surjaudaja knows very well and mentioned today and explained today, the experience that we had with her institution is one of those that you really feel proud of being part of IFC and the World Bank Group. No? The investment of $200 million in the Ocbc Nisb bond issuance, which targets green and gender finance in Indonesia, marked the first ever gender bond and the third non-sovereign green bond in Indonesia, something that I believe is really important to also link these two pieces of the agenda. The State Bank of Pakistan's policy approach well reflects IFC's own gender principles. In IFC, we aim to provide a holistic approach to developing a gender proposition for banks, financial institutions. Key to that is viewing the women's market as a viable business opportunity, as well as increasing overall women's employment, especially in leadership, and enhancing opportunities to promote women's entrepreneurship. I think that digital financial services opens so many opportunities to accelerate financial inclusion, and especially for women. And I really would like to stress my personal support and the support of all the IFC team to the State Bank of Pakistan to achieve its goals. Under your leadership, Governor and Deputy Governor, I'm sure that we will achieve these goals. Today's discussion is a testimony to the desire and the shared need to ensure that we all play our role in seeing that women gain access to the financing and knowledge they need for success in their ventures. Let me finish with one point, a link to what Hart said at the beginning. In Spain, in my home country, women had access to an account freely only in the 70s. So until the 70s, they didn't have access to an account, which is actually not so far away. And today, Spain, we can say that actually all women can have freely and can enjoy financial services as any other. So the future is there, and I'm sure that with this plan, we will achieve it together, working together, the public and the private sector. Thank you very much, Governor, and it has been a big pleasure.
So thank you very much, everybody. Now, as unfortunately time has come to conclude this session, this was an absolutely fascinating discussion. So thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to everybody. Thank you very much, Governor and Deputy Governor. I hope you also got insight and examples from other countries in the world that will continue to fuel your own thinking and approach to this really important issue, which is critical to development. So thank you, everybody. You may have seen on the chat that if you want to provide comments and feedback, ask questions to the State Bank of Pakistan, there is an email address that has been provided. So please do not hesitate to do so. The Banking on Equality policy is available on the website of the State Bank of Pakistan. And today's webinar was recorded. It will be made available. So please, that was a really interesting discussion. Disseminate, use social media, because I think the more we hear about this topic and the example around the world, the more we will push the agenda. And really big thanks to the State Bank of Pakistan for spearheading this effort. And the World Bank Group is extremely supportive, and we very much look forward to continue to work with you in this endeavor. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much to everybody who joined the discussion and listened in. And really, let's continue to work together on this very, very important and fascinating agenda. Thank you.
Thank you to the State Bank. Lovely conversation.
Thank you very much. It was really honored to be with you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Governor, and good
Good to
to
see you,
see you.
Governor. Deputy Governor.